let's go ahead and go back to the film,
which we are calling the Heartland model because it is in primarily the heartland of the United States. So this is the proposed North American setting for the Book of Mormon. How many of you know where Zarahemla is located? Well, if you read Doctrine and Covenants section 125, verse 3, it tells you, "Let them build up a city unto my name upon the land opposite the city of Nauvoo, and let the name of Zarahemla be named upon it."
Yeah.
Now again, this is the Lord speaking in first person English, and so the name Zarahemla is not Joseph Smith's choice, it is the Lord's choice of words. Now the Lord did not say specifically that this area is the ancient city of Zarahemla, but he also didn't exclude that idea. I find it interesting that we have the city of Jerusalem in the Old World, but when the Lord wanted to have a comparable situation for the gathering of the house of Israel on the New World, he didn't name that one Jerusalem. The Lord has an infinite number of names that he could give to a site, and I think that this is very interesting that he specifically named this site on the opposite side of the river from Nauvoo, Zarahemla. There are some very, very significant things about this location that most people are not aware of. In the Book of Mormon, which side of the Sidon River was the ancient city of Zarahemla located? According to Alma chapter 6, verse 7, it says, "And now it came to pass that when Alma had made these regulations, he departed from them, yea, from the church which was in the city of Zarahemla, and went over upon the east of the river Sidon into the valley of Gideon," which means that Zarahemla was on the west side of the river. There's actually several other scriptures that correlate with that as well. This view is from a porch that is down closer to Keokuk, and then it's looking almost due north. So you can see Nauvoo, Illinois on the right-hand side, and then Zarahemla, Iowa, which is also today called Montrose, Iowa, is on the left side. Between Nauvoo to the north and Keokuk to the south, there was a set of rapids on the Mississippi River called the Des Moines Rapids. These rapids between Nauvoo and Keokuk were the first location upstream from the Gulf of Mexico where the Mississippi River could actually be crossed on foot.
Amazing.
Historical records state that its mean depth was only 2.4 feet, with most of the crossing being more shallow, especially in the dry season. A little bit of historical background: when riverboats used to ply the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, they would have to stop and unload their cargo at Keokuk because the river was too shallow to take riverboats up over these rapids. The river was about 2,500 feet wide above Nauvoo and below Keokuk, but then spread out to 4,500 feet wide at the Des Moines Rapids that we're speaking of here. Let me just ask you a quick question. If you can't cross the Mississippi River all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up to this point, does that not make this a very strategic location? If you were a military commander that had 30,000 men and you needed to get across the river, you have basically two options. You can swim or you can take a boat, a canoe or something across the river. Well, getting 20 to 30,000 men across the river in boats, 3 or 4 at a time in a canoe, would take an awful long time to do that. And swimming the Mississippi River prior to the time of the dams and the locks, this is a very wild river with a lot of undertows and currents and so forth that could easily drown people, especially if you are Nephites or Lamanites who have armor on, or you're carrying, you have breastplates and head plates and so forth that you're doing. This is not a good river to swim across. And so it would make it a very strategic location from a military standpoint to hold this area. If you could control these rapids, then you could pretty much control who comes and goes across the river. But it also would mean that this would be a very strategic location from a trading standpoint. From an economic standpoint, it makes sense that the largest civilization, or the largest city in this civilization, would be near these rapids because this is where traders would be able to move goods back and forth across the river without having big boats and so forth to do that. So this becomes a very strategic location, and I find it fascinating that the city of Zarahemla in the Book of Mormon is typically the largest city and it was the one that was established the earliest, and it was there all the way until the very end. And in fact, in the very final battles between the Lamanites and the Nephites, they specifically said that the battle began at Zarahemla.
The
Sidon
side.
River, then, if you look up in the index of the Book of Mormon, it states that the Sidon River is the most prominent river in Nephite territory and runs north to a sea. Well, how could this be describing the Mississippi River? Because obviously it runs south into a sea. Well, the index is actually not part of the original Book of Mormon. It was written later, and it's not scripture, but rather helpful reference information. We know it ran either north or south, as it had east and west banks. But what does the head of the river mean? Noah Webster's dictionary in 1828, which was in common use at the time of Joseph Smith, had two different definitions for the head of a river. The first definition would be the principal source of a stream as the head of the Nile. But there was a second definition that I had never realized existed. Conflux. C-O-N-F-L-U-X. I wasn't positively sure. It sounded like confluence a little bit, but I wanted to make sure, so I looked it up in the same dictionary, the word conflux, and it was thus defined. Say, it says, see confluence. Okay? Now, under confluence, Webster's 1828 dictionary defines it as 1, a flowing together, the meeting or junction of two or more streams of water or other fluid. Also the place of meeting as the confluence of the Tigris and the Fret, or the Euphrates, or of the Ohio and the Mississippi.
That's it.
This being the case, the head of a river has two potential definitions, one being where it begins, the other being where it meets another river.
Can we stop that for just a
And
second?
depending on which one of those definitions,
That's exciting.
So I
but
ended
make
up-
sure they know that's the Missouri River that heads to your left.
Yeah.
The Mississippi goes up and down. The one to the right, going up to the right, parallel to the Mississippi, is the Illinois. So they understand where we're at. St. Louis is in that area.
Yes, right in that general area called the American Bottoms, they call it. Okay, because this is interesting because I put this out in 2009. Okay, in this DVD. I then wrote a white paper with this information, and I wanted to find out why is it that everybody in the Mesoamerica, ideology basically, why is it they think that the river Sidon has to flow north? And I finally got a really definitive answer from a couple of guys who really espouse the Mesoamerica theory, and basically this is the reasoning behind it. They said, well, we know that Zarahemla was where the river Sidon went past it on its east side. Said, but then there's about 2 or 3 different places where it talks about Manti. The land of Manti was south of Zarahemla, and the head of the river was near Manti, closer to Manti. So if the head of the river is there, and the head of the river means where it begins, then that would make sense that the river starts at Manti and flows north past Zarahemla. And that was one thing that really had me stumped for quite a while until I started doing this research and found out that, okay, Noah Webster said that. But also the Book of Mormon itself says several times where they did head the armies of the Lamanites, for example, or they did head the flocks of King Lamoni or whatever. When they're talking about head in the Book of Mormon, many times it's talking about they're going on a trajectory where they intersect with the army, or they intersect with the flocks. They're not going to a place where the flocks or the army started from. They're
coming together.
They're coming together,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that's another aspect of it. Then Jonathan Neville actually found a couple of instances where they talked about a river that they used in the 1800s, where the use of head of a river as a confluence was in regular usage back in Joseph Smith's day.
Right.
So I wrote this white paper, got it to the Scriptures Committee, The
This was
Scriptures
in about
Committee,
what year? This was only
about 2011 or 12.
about
So-
when I met you, I
Because
think.
people would always just point to the triple combination index and say, well, there it is. The church says the river Sidon flowed north.
Right.
And then when we got to the Scriptures Committee, and apparently they took a look at the research and said, yeah, that has east and west banks, but there's nowhere where it definitively says. And when I pointed out the fact that Noah Webster's dictionary actually has two different definitions, and it could be one or the other, they actually pull it out. So if you go to your scriptures on your phone today and you look up Sidon and your
Under the topical index.
your triple
right.
combination index, okay, you look up Sidon, it will say to you, Sidon, most prominent river in Nephite territory.
They took out.
They removed the part about it going north to a sea. There's some Mesoamerica guys. In fact, when I was with the Paul brothers doing that interview, they did another
Hayden
interview.
Paul and Jackson Paul,
Hayden Jackson, yes.
who Hayden will be speaking at our Firm Foundation
Yeah.
conference.
Yes, but basically they had an interview with another very knowledgeable person, Kirk Magleby from
Scripture Central now.
who had a previous interview with the Paul brothers, and he gave them a book and said, look, right here, the river Sidon flows north.
And what year was that book published?
He didn't tell them that the church has taken it out.
That was a 1981 book. He showed them
It was an
that
older
said
book,
north
yeah.
still.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot of that. Some people have questioned whether or not the Mississippi could actually be crossed on foot, and actually, I have in
Hold that thought. Let me just say this.
Yeah.
Robert E. Lee, before the big Civil War, took his survey team, he was a big surveyor team, to the Mississippi. And they were trying to find a place where they could cross the Mississippi by walking. And they found a place by doing those poles all over, and 4 feet, 3 feet, 6 feet,
Yeah.
and you could cross right about where Joseph Smith rode his horse across.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Which is like-
amazing.
yeah.
Robert E. Lee proves Joseph Smith.
Yeah. In fact, many of you know that one of the most famous people back in the early 1900s and so forth was Mark Twain, who was a riverboat captain. And a lot of people know that he was originally Samuel Clemens. This is a little piece of trivia for you. But basically, how did he get his author name? Basically, his
Tom Sawyer?
no, his Mark Twain. He was.
I,
originally,
Twain, don't know.
It was Samuel Clemens, right?
Okay.
The reason why he called himself Mark Twain as a pen name was because when he was a riverboat captain, they would have to test and see how deep the river was, because the river was quite wide and not very deep.
Yeah.
And so in order to get riverboats up the river, they would take a long stick that was about 6 feet, or well, about eight or 9 feet
Yeah.
long, but it had a mark on it at 6 feet. And,
Which is what Robert E. Lee did.
yeah, and so they would take that stick and they would stick it down, and if they couldn't touch bottom at the mark, then they knew that they could continue to go up the river in that direction. It was 6 feet is actually 2 yards. So the mark was at Twain yards. So this is where Mark Twain, as long as it came down to Mark Twain, the second rung up, the second yard up.
After about 12,
They could-
13 years,
they
I
could
never
continue
heard
up
that. You're getting new information, folks.
All right, but we actually have in this book, which by the way, I apologize. This book was
It's out of
was
print.
actually put out back in
2011, I
11 or
think.
so. We had about 65,000 copies have gone out. It's the #1 best-selling book on the geography of the Book of Mormon. Costco a year ago completely wiped us out. They took all the rest of our inventory that we had. I was going to reprint it again, and we're going to do that, but I want to update it with so much stuff, because as you can see, 15 years ago, there's a lot of new information. This came out in 2012. There's so much more information. We have amazing footage and photography and drone shots and so forth now that we didn't have when I put out this book.
But I've got 3 I just found, and they're $1,000 each. Just email me at riannelson@aol.com. Seriously. And I'll get you one of those 3 for $1,000 or so.
Okay, well, just kidding. All right. But anyway, in this book, though, we had an account on page 81 of August 8th of 1842, where there was a group of men that there was actually a posse coming over to Nauvoo to apprehend the prophet Joseph Smith, and he kind of went into hiding and so forth, and they ended up having a guy dress up like Joseph and actually rode on Joseph Smith's horse, which was called
Charlie?
Joe Duncan.
Joe Duncan. Charlie was one too, I think.
Well, Joe Duncan was named after
somebody.
A not that helpful.
Dunkin' Donuts guy.
No. He was a governor that was not very helpful to the saints. But anyway, so he named his horse after him. But anyway, but they rode their horses literally across the river. Now this was in the fall of the year, but that was at 2.4 feet. That's barely up to my knees. And so they could actually cross the Mississippi River, and that's the only place where they could do it, which makes that one of the most strategic locations in all of North America.
Yeah, that limestone ridge was under there.
Yeah.
And it was just solid, kind of like these up here I talked about, the formations, those kinds of things. There was that big ridge through there. And this wide area here in blue, it's called the Mississippi embayment.
Mississippi.
The embayment, which is kind of limestone that's almost that wide in some places. So that's part of why I have this open like that. Not that it's all a river, but that it could be shallow
drainage
in there.
That's the drainage area.
Right.
Okay, but the interesting thing is that, and I'm going to show you this real quick. I'll stand up so you can see this. So from here, if you took a riverboat from New Orleans and you started going up the Mississippi River, you could continue all the way up here until it got all the way up here. There's St. Louis, and all the way up here, but they had to stop at the Des Moines Rapids, which was too shallow for the riverboats to get any further. And that's where they would stop at Nauvoo. This is the reason why Nauvoo was originally not called Nauvoo, which means the city beautiful. It was originally called Commerce. And the reason why it was called Commerce is because there's a big bend in the river there. And the riverboats couldn't get past that rapid because it was too shallow. So what happened is the riverboats would stop down at by Keokuk, and they would offload their goods and so forth, and they would offload that, and then they would portage it up around the let's see where we're at right there. They would portage it up around Nauvoo, and then they could put it back just up by Montrose. They could put it back on board ships coming from the north down, and they could go another 180 miles clear up into Wisconsin.
Right.
Okay. And so that's why it was called Commerce, because there was a shipping thing that they could do there to transport the goods and so forth up and down the river and get over that rapid. But then Nauvoo was established. The reason why it was called Commerce is because it was on the east side of the river. Instead of having to go clear around the bend of the river, they could go straight across it. Yeah. So they could cut off about 5 or 6 miles of wagon time and travel, so they could undercut the prices of the people on the other side of the river. And that's how Nauvoo got its start. But the problem was it was a swamp. So when the Saints got there, the first thing they did was drain the swamp.
Big time.
Which sounds like something we need to do here in America.
Oh man, let's drain that swamp.
But anyway, so bottom line is that we go clear it further up there, and then they can continue up there. So that rapid was an important part even in more modern U.S. history. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting because when we go this summer, this spring, we're going to see the eclipse.
April 1st through the 11th.
Yeah. And one of the places we're going to be going.
BookofMormonEvidence.org. Click on tours.
Yeah, and one of the places we're going to be going is called the Steamboat Arabia exhibit in Kansas City, which is right up there.
Back over in here.
And it turns out that there was a steamboat called the Arabia that actually hit a snag and sank in the middle of the river back in 1860.
But it was 140 feet from the river.
Well, no, this was when it sank. It was in the river.
Right.
And over the course of the last 200 years or so, the river course, the river channel is actually moved, and it was more than that. It was almost a quarter of a mile.
It's amazing.
Away from the current river channel, out in the middle of a cornfield, and people took ground penetrating radar out there and were able to find the big boiler of the ship was really easily seen by the radar.
And there's a big museum there now.
And it's awesome. It's like walking into an 1860 Walmart. Yeah. Everything from, they had jars of pickles that were still perfectly good. They ate some of those pickles and stuff. They had buttons and rifles.
Why'd you think of pickles?
And tools and everything, because had bottles of them, right? And they actually even had whiskey apparently, but nobody seems to have ever found the whiskey, or so they think.
Well.
Anyway, but it was interesting because the ship was 45 feet below the surface of the cornfield.
Amazing.
And
all
that's
that sand there?
In just in a couple of hundred years.
And one thing about that, you see this picture that's up there on the screen right now, that's where this area is up in here, okay?
Yeah.
Now,
By
that
St.
area
Louis.
is where the Missouri hits into the Mississippi. But look at this circle down here. This is where we believe very likely is the head of the river Sidon, which is the Mississippi connected to the Ohio River. Mm-hmm. This area right here, closest place by Kentucky, what's that little place? Paducah, Kentucky. But it's
where the
right
Tennessee
there,
River comes in.
and Rod's tours go right there. And there's a Mississippi New Madrid Earthquake Museum just down right here. See this river? This was a man-made river. I'm sorry, not a man-made, by the backflow of the Mississippi River during the earthquake of 1811 and 1812. I got to throw that in there because that's the equivalent of 3rd Nephi, the earthquake when the Savior came, is imitated right there in 1811, 1812 at the New Madrid fault zone. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out another thing. We mentioned that the Phoenicians came from the area around Lebanon, mm-hmm. and one of their primary cities is Sidon.
Or Sidon, as we know.
Sidon, as we would know. Interesting,
So,
the name Mississippi.
Sidon to Sidon.
Right. The name Mississippi comes from the French word Mississippi, which is in the Anishinaabe language of the Ojibwe, or Algonquin, rendering great river or gathering of waters or father of waters. But another alternative is the name is said to derive from the Lenape word, which means Nemesis for fish, and Sipu, river or river of fish. The word Sidon is a Phoenician word meaning fishing place or fishery.
And they're both Algonquin groups.
Yeah, so this is so the river Sidon in the old world was the place of fishing, the fishing place, and the Native Americans call this the river of fish.
Or the father of waters.
Yes.
That's
so,
a real reverence for a river.
Yeah, so there's just so much that we can share with you about this ancient city of Zarahemla and the Mississippi River. And I just wanted to point out one last thing, and that is that the head of the river Sidon, because people said, well, it could be either definition, right? And yeah, it could be where a river initiates.
You mean where
it starts.
Mississippi starts way up here,
or up in
at the
Yellowstone National
confluence.
Park,
right?
Actually, right. Okay, so the bottom line is that there is a passage though that I wanted to point out in the Book of Mormon. And this provides further insight, and it's Alma chapter 56, verses 24 and 25, and it reads that now they're talking about this is the Nephites talking about the Lamanite army, and the Lamanite army, durst not pass by us with their whole army, neither durst they with a part, lest they should be insufficiently strong and they should fall. So he's talking about the reasons why the Lamanite army was not going to come against them, right? Because they didn't want to go by with their whole army. They didn't want to go with the part. Neither durst they march down against the city of Zarahemla, which makes sense because it's their capital city. It's the strongest part of the Nephites, so they were afraid to go there. It says, neither durst they cross the head of Sidon over to the city of Nephihah. Well, if the head of the river was where it started, its origin, presumably a small stream, what would be so scary about crossing there?
Rivers together, confluence.
But if it's the confluence definition, now all of a sudden makes sense why they would be afraid to cross, because the Mississippi River where it meets with the Ohio, the confluence there, or the head of the river Sidon as we see it, it's almost 1.5 miles across. It would obviously very scary to cross
And close
the head
by,
of the river Sidon.
close by is the Tennessee River and the Cumberland that are just off of the Ohio a little bit. This huge area of river right here.
everything's
This area
converging right
is
there.
so agriculturally important to the rest of the agriculture of the whole area.
Yeah, so it just makes sense that the confluence definition is what the Book of Mormon was using, or what Joseph Smith was using as far as this translation of the head of the river. Okay, do you want to talk about this map real quick?
Well, I'll tell you, I love this map. This map. I am officially a mapaholic and a Zelfaholic. I love Zelf and I love maps. And
You're a
me,
little self-absorbed, I think.
I'm Zelf-armed. Okay, so be careful.
Well, you're pretty self-confident.
Yes, I
Okay.
have Zelf-brilliance.
All right.
I don't know if that's a word.
That's not.
But anyway, these maps are exciting. And by the way, Moroni's America Map
this is
Edition
awesome.
has over 160 maps, just like you're seeing up on the screen, that take you, if you look in the front, it tells you the date, the title, the year, and it goes by Book of Mormon in a specific order of different things. So if you're on Mosiah chapter 2, you can go to Mosiah 2 and find a map and so forth. One thing I forgot to speak about is there at Nauvoo and that area, the Curleys, Wilson and Jenny Curley have some mounds there. There's 13 Native American mounds, and it is very likely that's the area that Alma chapter 2 and or Alma chapter 43 talk about throwing heaps of bodies into the river, into the Sidon, and crossing the river, and those types of things. That's exciting. I've got a blog about that with the Curleys.
Yeah, that tells you a little bit more about the river Sidon. First off, we know the river could be shipped. They were shipping things on the river.
Right.
Also,
all the
it had
way
to
from
be-
Michigan.
It was such a big river that the Nephites, in fact, this became a military strategy by Captain Moroni and Lehi, who was not the original Lehi, but Teancum and those guys, right? Anyway, so the Lamanites had been on a rampage through the Nephite territory, and they were coming back around, and then Captain Moroni came up with a plan. He said, "What we're going to do is I'm going to hide on the west side of the river Sidon, and Lehi and his people, his army,
Hill Ripla?
were going to hide themselves on the east side of the river Sidon. When the Lamanites would come down, they were going to cross the river Sidon, and as they started to cross, then Lehi and his armies would come in behind them and attack them in the river, and then Moroni and his people would come on the other side, and they would basically try to trap them in the river crossing. The question is this: if the river was some kind of a small stream, how would the Nephites possibly know where they were going to cross? They could cross anywhere. But if it being the Mississippi River, and there's only one or two crossings, there's the Falls of the Ohio, which is they could cross the Ohio River, and then there's the Des Moines Rapids, which is up here by Nauvoo. Those are the only two places you could really cross the river on foot. Otherwise, you'd have to take canoes across. And so in doing that, they basically had to have the Nephites knew where the crossing was, the Lamanites knew where the crossing was, and the Nephites knew right where they could ambush them.
Yeah.
Because they had to come down to that crossing.
And if you look on page 61, you will see that battle of Moroni's battle at Riverside in Alma chapter 43. And it shows you the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how that fight is talked about in the Book of Mormon. These are exciting because I'm a visual
it suddenly
person.
makes all sense. I mean,
It does.
The time frames and how long it took people to do it, and Alma's journeys and so forth. I mean, when you see and you can actually map it out. I mean, we don't know where every little city was because a lot of things were destroyed around the time of Christ's death and things.
Yep.
But there's enough information there that we can know within what 50, 60 miles.
Oh yeah,
typically.
we can guess very easily based upon a few things.
Right. Okay. So, anyway, all right. Let's continue on with the.
Here's the
film.
guess.
Oh.
There's all the cities of today and all the cities of the Book of Mormon where we think is possible.
And those are we tried to align those with archaeological locations.
Right. Page 48.
Which, by the way, archaeologically, I got to do a little shout out here for Gregory Little. This is the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American Indian Mounds and Earthworks.
Non-Mormon.
Not a member of the church, and actually, he and a whole slew of colleagues that produced this book. And in it, basically, they go state by state. The table of contents has each state, and it shows the Native American mounds and earthworks that are in each state. So you can see,
Even Utah.
all kinds of things. Of course, when you get to Ohio and Kentucky and back in the Midwest, there's just page after page. This is Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, and so forth. But interestingly, one of my favorite parts of this book is that he
I'm asking a
asked the
question. Have you ever? How many mounds were there ever in America, in North America? About how many do you think?
Well, if you take a look at the
No,
Cyrus,
you got to read his quote.
If you take a look at the Cyrus Thomas map
Right.
from back in 1890,
Right.
it showed about 250,000 locations or sites that they knew of back in the 1890s.
Sites, not mounds.
Right, sites. Yeah.
Like a site could be 30 mounds.
Several mounds. Yeah, exactly. And this is what he says on page 3. This is the definitive work on the ancient mound builders, the mounds and so forth of
Gregory
those people.
Little.
He says the most common question that is asked about mounds is how many exist. In the 1800s, the Smithsonian sponsored many expeditions to identify mound sites across America. A map reproduced here in greatly reduced form was published by Cyrus Thomas in 1894 in the Bureau of Ethnology book. And they found approximately, 100,000 mound sites, many with complexes containing 2 to 100 mounds. Okay. The figure of 100,000 mounds once existing, based on the Cyrus Thomas maps revealing 100,000 sites, is often cited by others. But that estimate is far, far too low. After visiting several thousand mounds and reviewing all the literature, I am fairly certain that over 1 million mounds once existed and perhaps 100,000 still exist. Oddly, some new mound sites are discovered each year by archaeological surveys in remote areas, but in truth, the large majority of Americans' mounds have been completely destroyed by farming, construction, looting, and deliberate total excavation.
And isn't that the difference in North America versus South America? North America, they're buried under or built clay on top. Yeah. Where are all the big cities, they say? Well, there's Cahokia that's probably 20, 30,000. There's a place in Oklahoma there's places that you'll find that had 4 and 8 and 10 and 20,000 people in North America, but we just haven't started digging until Thomas Jefferson was the first archaeologist at his home in Virginia, and he found all kinds of bones and ruins of the Hopewell, and that fed in directly to why they purchased the Louisiana Purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just another quick one, and that is that basically around St. Louis, around Cahokia area, originally they thought that it had maybe a population. Now this is after the Book of Mormon time frames,
right.
So this was in the Mississippian time frames.
So 1,000 AD.
Yeah, about 20 to 25,000 people.
Right.
Then they got some money to do a lot of archaeological work because they were putting in the new bridge across the Mississippi River. Right. There. That's a big cable bridge, so it's actually earthquake resistant. Okay, we're going to get into that in just a minute too. But basically, so they put this Isaiah Marlowe bridge across the Mississippi River. They got some funding, and in that funding, they found that their estimates of population there were way, way low. It went from about 20 to 25,000 to over 85,000 people were living in the American Bottom area around St. Louis,
right.
Back in the 1100s, 900 to 1100 AD. So we're talking about a very sizable population of people had lived here anciently, and it's just really exciting to see all that. Okay, so let's see if we can go back to our video and continue on.
Man, we take too many breaks. This stuff, It's amazing.
It's just awesome. Yeah.
then will make a lot more sense. Let me give you a little bit of information of why it is thought that the Sidon River flowed to the north. First off, we know that Manti is southward from Gideon and Zarahemla. Gideon was located just across the river Sidon, within hours' travel from Zarahemla, and it was also much closer to Zarahemla than Manti was. It follows then that the general direction from Zarahemla to Manti was southward, the same as it was from Gideon southward, away to the land of Manti, as mentioned in Alma 17:1. Now, Manti was near the head of the river Sidon. If Manti was near the head of the river Sidon, and then you traveled north and the river went past Zarahemla, then you have a river that essentially goes to the north. So by using the standard definition, the principal source of a stream, if Manti was where the Sidon River began, and it flowed past Zarahemla to the north, then it stands to reason that the river then flowed northward. However, if the confluence definition is used, Manti would have been at a junction of two rivers, which means that the river flowed past Zarahemla and then on down into the junction or head at Manti, which would thereby indicate a southerly flow from Zarahemla down to the confluence. In Alma chapter 43, it describes a battle in which the armies of the Lamanites came from Antonium to attack the Nephites at Jershon, which was to the north and east of Zarahemla. They then went down into the borders of the land Manti, which means that they traveled from Zarahemla south, going down to the land of Manti. Rivers flow down in elevation, which again indicates that the Sidon River may actually have been flowing to the south from Zarahemla towards Manti. Another area of interest is Spring Hill in the vicinity of Adamondayaman. This is actually a photograph of a sign that the church has there. On this sign it says, "By following the roads as marked, visitors may see the area of Spring Hill or Adamondayaman. Also, there is an overlook on the western portion of the valley of Adamondayaman from a prominence called Tower Hill. Tower Hill is a name given by Joseph Smith because of the remains of an old Nephite altar." See History of the Church, Volume 3, page 35. The exact location of the structure is not known today, and there is no visual evidence remaining.
Nephite.
So we have, again, Joseph Smith in the History of the Church indicating a Nephite altar in North America at Adamondayaman, which of course we know is a very significant sacred location. So let's take a look at the Book of Mormon geographic map anchors. Now I believe that these are 10 solid anchors into the map or the geography of the Book of Mormon. We know where the Hill Cumorah is, for example, up in the northeast. Zarahemla, according to Doctrine and Covenants 125, is here. The plains of the Nephites, according to Joseph Smith's letter to his wife Emma, is here. The Rocky Mountains are over here on the left-hand side. The Sea East, which according to the Zelph accounts was related to Lake Ontario, or where the Hill Cumorah is. The New Jerusalem we know is down here. Adamondayaman is, of course, right in this same area as well. The first missionaries were sent in New York, Ohio, and Missouri. Haplogroup X DNA is found throughout this Heartland region and up into Canada, and the Promised Land is the United States of America. So those are 10 anchors into the geographic model. This is the map with the 4 primary locations from the Hopewell interaction sphere. If we take the archaeological evidence and apply this to the evidence that we have as far as the Book of Mormon in a North American setting, you'll find that there's a lot of very nice correlations that happen here. Now, this is my pick for land of first inheritance. If they came in this route naturally, as you can see from this photograph of Hurricane Hugo, that this is the route that normally comes in. Usually hurricanes come in on the east coast of the United States or up into the Gulf of Mexico. If they came up into the Gulf of Mexico, it would make a lot of sense that they may have landed where this land of first inheritance idea is, which is actually Poverty Point. Then as the Lamanites became more and more wicked, the Nephites moved away from the Lamanites into the interior of America and settled the southern portion of the Appalachian Mountains. And eastern Tennessee is where my pick would be for the land of Nephi. Going further to the north, we have Zarahemla, where the Lord named Zarahemla in the Doctrine and Covenants section 125, and then we have Bountiful over in the Ohio River Valley. Those are the primary picks. We're not trying to establish individual cities or where they were specifically at. We don't know that. This is just a generalized idea of where this may have occurred. And this is taking this map that was adapted from the Time Life books that shows, again, the Ohio River Valley and Mississippi River Valley, and then this is put onto this topographic map so you can kind of get an idea, again, that these are the locations where this would have occurred. In Ether, chapter 10, verse 20, it says, "And they built a great city by the narrow neck of land, by the place where the sea divides the land." Now that is a very interesting statement, where the sea divides the land. Where in Central America do we have any place where the sea divides the land? You see, in Central America, the land divides the two seas. But these are interior seas, and so the seas are actually dividing up the land in this case. So it makes a lot more sense in a North American setting from that standpoint. Here in 1 Nephi chapter 18, verse 23, it says, "It came to pass that after we had sailed for the space of many days, we did arrive at the promised land, and we went forth upon the land and did pitch our tents, and we called it the promised land." When they arrived, from the very time that they first set foot on the American continent, they said, "We are on the promised land." This is about 588 to 323 BC. The Nephites split from the Lamanites. This is in 2 Nephi chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. It says, "We did take our tents and whatsoever things were possible for us, and we did journey into the wilderness for the space of many days. And after we had journeyed for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents. And my people would that we should call it Nephi." And so we called it Nephi. If the land of first inheritance was somewhere along the Gulf Coast and they traveled many days into the interior, this certainly would have been a possible range for them to have landed on the land of Nephi.
Okay, let's hold that for
And
just a
Omni,
second.
verse 12, it says, "Behold,
Hold on.
Amalekite."
Okay, so
In this area, he ended with this.
Yeah.
This is what we might call Nephi's Valley, where the Lamanites drove the Nephites here. And there's an important junction there called Unicoi Gap, which is a beautiful area. And where the river start, go this way and that way. And, well, it's a double gap, not a triple
So
gap.
tell us a little bit more about the different rivers, because let's assume for a second that, so when we do our tours, we actually start off here in Tallahassee, Florida.
Right.
And although there's evidence, archaeological evidence, clear down here to Crystal River, and actually one of the most important places we think is actually
On the beach, Blue Dolphin talked about.
yes, Blue Dolphin Crow talked about that, and that is where it's a place where Australians come,
Right.
and they hang out.
It's right close to here.
And they do that. And interestingly enough, Native Americans to this day call America Turtle Island.
Yeah.
And the Book of Mormon talks about how we are on an isle of the sea.
Yeah.
So
As you know, the white culture.
that's where it is. It's
Yeah.
Port Beach. And that's just right in here. But anyway, so this is the area. If you take a look in this book, they'll show you that there's all kinds of mounds, and you've been actually to some mounds that I haven't even been to down there in Florida. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on here in the Florida area where the land of first inheritance.
Right here is Apalachicola, Florida. And the Appalachian Indians were prominent here. This is the area where pottery has been dated by the Deptford culture at 600 BC, which I have been fortunate enough to be on those lands with Mike and Betty LaFontaine. And we've got pieces of that pottery that has been identified by my phone to her book, to her, Nancy White, at South Florida, at Tampa, Florida, an archaeologist, that she said, that's the exact same pottery I found when we searched that area of Apalachicola. And there's a 300-page book that I can tell you about of that area. It's amazing. But this is called the Apalachicola
In the river, before we head up there, this thing that we talked about, one and a couple.
The Crystal River is over here.
So there's a couple of big mounds over in this area.
And they date to like 500 to 550 BC.
Yeah.
Wayne May likes this area quite a bit. He is
Yeah.
research, survey, and you know what? There's so many of us that have so many ideas. The exciting thing is we can differ a little bit, but we all have the same purpose, to show that North America is the place.
There's a place over here called Wakula Springs. Yeah, which I take out there to my with our Florida discovery tours that we've done more recently, the last couple of years. And in that spring, they have found they have these like glass bottom boats, and they take you around, and they found mastodon bones.
There's several mastodons already down there. You can see from the boat.
Yeah, in this spring, there's
no mastodons in that Mesoamerica.
awesome mounds all around that whole area there. And it's just anyway. So there's overwhelming amount of mounds. We're just right outside of Talis, right there, right here, just to the east of there is the Love Letchworth mounds, and Love Letchworth mounds has some great big mounds as well. So,
and you know what else?
All over the area.
In Apalachicola, this is one thing people wouldn't even think of. What was one of the main products the Jaredites brought over to North America? What did they have? Those big hives of bees. We know they had bees, and they needed honey. Well, guess what? Down here in Apalachicola is the #1 place in the entire world, maybe two, that have Tupelo honey, which is the honey that will never turn into sugar. It'll stay honey up. It doesn't. It stays liquid. Okay, and that is right there. And we looked at it and saw where they found. And there's a special plant there that is from there, and this area along this coast is the only place they grow. So having honey where Lehi landed, it doesn't mention he brought bees. Maybe he did, but we know the Jaredites did. That's a whole other story. But this is called the Chattahoochee River. And the Chattahoochee is the only river that flows from up here that goes down it goes from ice down into the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, but there's one other river that I find is fascinating.
Flint, it's right here.
Hold on, let me say something. Okay, so there's another river. So the Chattahoochee goes all the way up here from Nephi's Valley, basically in the gap here.
Right.
There's another river that starts just below that right here. It comes down this direction. And interestingly enough, in the Book of Mormon, when Nephi, those who followed him, actually left the land of first inheritance because of the hostilities from Lemuel, and so that they would travel many days into the wilderness, right? They went up north, that they would establish the land of Nephi. Now there's two things here that are really important. Number one is when they got here, of course, we know in the Book of Mormon that they had to fight their way in, right? I mean, there was people already here. They were warring with them and trying to take over their lands. No, that's not how the Book of Mormon goes. They got up here to pretty much an empty land. They didn't have to fight their way in. There was no evidence there was anybody else around. This is another big factor with the Mesoamerican theory, is that they basically, they say the reason why there's no DNA evidence is because the Lehi and his family, they assimilated right into the Mayan civilization that was already there, well established, and so they just kind of assimilated into that population. But it doesn't really make any sense if Nephi and those who followed him went and established the land of Nephi, and they were assimilating into another culture that was much more established and had thousands of people at that point in time. Why would they make Nephi the king?
Yeah,
it doesn't really make any sense that they might do that. So there is no evidence that there was other people there. In fact, they were multiplying, replenishing, and in fact, the Nephites wouldn't have even married with anybody outside of their own kindred because their Hebrew heritage says that you don't marry outside of your culture, outside of your kindred is technically the word that's used there. Yeah. And in fact, the Nephites were under strict command not even to intermarry with their own brothers. Okay, so they're not going to be assimilating into any other group, and that's why they made Nephi the king, and there they hung out for almost 600 years. Okay, so what I find what's fascinating is that when they get to the land of Nephi, then Nephi is writing in his small place. Okay, and we find this I think it's in the book of Mosiah. Or no, it's in the second Nephi, I think it is. But anyway, he says that they left, and he says, and Lemuel, he's reflecting back on his brothers. He says, Lemuel's hearts were hardened like unto flint. Well, that's fascinating because the river that flows from here to here, goes from up here down through here, other than the Appalachian and the Chattahoochee River, is called the Flint River. So if Nephi would have followed this up here and followed the Flint River up and then came up to the Chattahoochee up here, up to the Gap, they literally would have been walking on the land, which is called the Flint River today because it's flint beds. And those flint beds are really, it's like a shirt. It's very hard. It's very sharp and jagged. Tear their moccasins apart, probably, their shoes and so forth. And probably really was a difficulty going up through this area. And it impressed on Nephi so much when he was traveling up through this area that he said that Lemuel's heart was like it. Let me see what was really hard. Oh, the flint that we went through.
Which is all we're going up in Ohio, where you take them to Flint Ridge.
Flint Ridge, that's Ohio, right? But this is when Nephi is talking about Lemuel's hearts being hard, like something that he could think of that they had just experienced.
Right.
And that's this flint that they had gone through as they left and went up to establish the land of Nephi. Okay.
Well, now one thing I want to say by Chattahoochee, that starts here.
Yeah.
This is the head of the Chattahoochee. And 1,732 feet from there is the head of the Hiawassee, which goes the opposite direction. And it flows to the Tennessee River. So that in between is a gap, a place where there's beautiful land with rivers going south and north right there. And a lot of people say in the Book of Mormon Central group, well, there's no north flowing river. The Tennessee River is a north flowing river.
Well,
right, what is there?
Here,
from here,
well, we know this all the way from here to there. It's flowing north for what, 150 miles.
And then there's this river that flows north.
Yeah, the Hiawassee.
No, that one too.
Yeah.
So then there's one over here, the big river.
Yeah. But also amazing. Then all of a sudden, several things make sense. But I think we're going to get into this in the video. Let's see. And you can see, hopefully, my brothers and sisters, you can see how much new information has happened in the last, 15 years. I mean, I had a lot of information here. Some of it was not quite accurate, and we're going to get to that.
It's not that
hard.
Yeah.
But the overall is still pretty accurate, and I'm really happy to see that some of this has been kind of proven out over time.